Hi, I'm Dave Heckman. I'm here with Professor George Day to interview him about his new book, Innovation Prowess. George, welcome to Knowledge at Wharton.
Thank you, Dave. I'm very, very excited about sharing my thinking on my new book, Innovation Prowess. And the subtitle is Leadership Strategies for Accelerating Growth. So let's start out by putting a question mark behind that title and say, what's the question I'm trying to answer? And I've been working on this for now over 25 years to understand what distinguishes consistent growth leaders, that is, companies that grow organically with their own resources, and what separates them from growth laggards. So I'm looking at growth leaders like IBM, Samsung, Lego, and companies of that caliber to try to discern over many, many years what sets them apart. The answer comes in two parts. Firstly, they have what I call growth-seeking discipline. And this is sort of symptomatic and resonates with Peter Drucker's notion that innovation is a skill just like learning the piano, that you build when you practice and invest a lot of time. So it's a replicable and disciplined skill. But that's only half the story. So you've got this growth-seeking discipline. You have to marry that closely with innovation ability. So innovation ability is got three parts to it. Your culture, which really overwhelms everything. So culture and leadership are the first factors. And so it has to be not obviously a growth-seeking, but risk-tolerant and experimenting. So there's a lot of aspects to culture that are important. The second two pieces of this organizational ability to innovate are capabilities, and I'm looking at a number of interesting adaptive capabilities which these growth leaders have. They can experiment. They really invest heavily in understanding their markets. They're very, very good at open innovation and partnering and sharing, and they do a lot of experimenting. They don't feel they have the answers, but they're going to try a lot of different things. They'll follow that mantra of start small, but think big, fail fast, and scale quickly if you get it right. And so they just get ahead of the laggards, and they stay ahead. The laggards are always catching up. So two parts, you have discipline plus ability, and that's what I mean by prowess.
Fabulous. Many senior leaders really can't see their way to achieve next year's growth objectives. How can Innovation Prowess help them?
Let me frame that, David. That's a great question. But it goes back to, I think it can be understood through a question that a research study posed a few years back to senior officers of a whole array of global companies. And the result they found was that only 29% of this sample of senior executives were very confident that they could reach their ambitious organic growth objectives. Now, I have shared this with many, many executive teams and executive program participants, and they all get it. They say, well, what about the other 70% who are only somewhat or not at all confident they can reach their growth objectives? And they can give me dozens of reasons. And embedded in those reasons why there's a lack of confidence comes the pathway to building prowess. So, for example, I hear a lot of explanations around short-termism. And so demand for short-term performance drives out long-run investments. Lack of leadership commitment and lack of discipline, being reactive. We see an awful lot of explanations around unwillingness to make long-term investments. Or if we do make them, the short-term profit pressures pull the resources back out of the long-term to meet short-term demands from the sales force, from the customers. And these are all important, but they take away from the growth engine. And then lastly, and perhaps most interesting, people are very averse to the big risks that come from substantial innovation. Now, I've arrayed all of these on a spectrum between what I call small I innovation, which is what you've got to do to stay in the game. These are upgrades, new versions, the next generation of technology, but you're still in your same business and you're simply staying competitive. That's the small I end of the spectrum. Big I is breakthrough, blue ocean, and I've done a lot of research through the Mac Center here at Wharton, and we have a pretty good sense of just how risky they are. But you're looking at 85 to 90% failure rates in the big I end of the spectrum. What we have figured and learned, and it's consistent with what other researchers and consultants have found, that the sweet spot is really adjacencies. That is, that they're adjacent in terms of drawing on your technology base, your production prowess, and so forth. They also are adjacent in that they leverage your brand, so your brand promise means something. You have some understanding of the market. You know how to get to the market, the channels, and so forth are important. So we focus a lot on maintaining consistent focus on these adjacencies as the real growth engine.
Thanks, George. Any advice you can offer about allocating capital and resources towards big I and little I innovation? I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion around where to invest to align with strategy.
That is a question that has both a short-term and a long-term answer to it. In the short run, the research is fairly consistent in showing that companies that want to grow above the industry rate probably invest 70% of what I'll call those small I innovations, because that's what you got to do to stay competitive, to meet the needs of channel partners and customers. But between 10 and 20% on this area of adjacencies. Now, that's the initial resource allocation. The problem is many companies start out that way, but they start sucking resources back from the riskier adjacencies and big I innovations in order to fund the short-term stuff and, by the way, meet their short-term profit targets. So the allocation often starts out in an optimal fashion, but then it loses that focus. So you now are not investing as much as you should. And we're seeing this played out in a lot of organizations which allow the operating managers control over long-term big I innovations and adjacencies. Now, that's not all bad, but let's look at the story of Procter & Gamble recently. They have not had anywhere near the past track record in breakthrough innovations that they used to have. And they traced that back, and this is their diagnosis, that some years ago we gave, that is Procter & Gamble, gave the operating managers, the division general managers, control over the innovation budget. And inevitably, the short-term pressures won out. Contrast that with GE, where Jeff Immelt has had imagination breakthroughs for many years now. And these are big, big projects, like getting into batteries, which is not a business they've been in before. And he personally, through a strategic fund, invests in those. But more importantly, he's watching those constantly. So every time he goes into a business, he's got with him a dossier on an imagination breakthrough that this company should be working, or this division should be working on. So management commitment is sustained, resources are sustained, they don't get siphoned off into short-run issues and opportunities. So that's the way you stay in the game. So you have discipline in finding these big opportunities, and then you have the ability to stay committed and focused.
That's great, George. The late Apple CEO Steve Jobs once said, "Don't let the voice of others drown out your own internal voice." how do you connect that with outside-in versus inside-out thinking, and how do you reconcile that balance within the organization's innovation process?
So the distinction between outside in and inside out is a question of where you start. And that's true in designing a competitive strategy or an innovation strategy and carrying that out. By outside in, I mean you start with the market and the latent needs, frustrations, problems that the customers have, but you also start with the competitors, where they are. So you're looking for innovations that create new value for customers that they're willing to pay for. So that's the outside-in perspective. You're standing in the shoes of the customers who, by the way, won't be able to tell you what the product looks like. They can tell you vividly about their frustrations and their problems. And if you think about Apple's breakthroughs, they're often built upon the inadequacies of, say, MP3 players. I mean, where the iPod was a brilliant example of understanding why the 15 companies with MP3 players weren't getting anywhere. It was a terrible experience. And Steve Jobs saw that, had the vision with his team, and of course spends an enormous amount of time with his design chief, and they're really thinking through every piece of that customer experience to deliver superior customer value. So that's the outside-in perspective, keeping in mind the customer's experience, satisfying their latent needs, trying to anticipate them, but you have to mesh that. And this is this marriage notion. You also have to have powerful inside-out capabilities. You need to have mastery of the technology, and you have to have the engineering skills, the production skills, the supply chain skills. So it's a question of where you start. If you start off with just the technology, looking for a solution, you won't get there.
Great, thanks, George. You describe in your book that it's somewhat counterproductive to frame the choice between organic and inorganic growth rather than finding the right balance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the book is first and foremost about growth leaders defined as superior rates of organic growth, that is with their own resources. And the distinction I draw here is with inorganic mergers and acquisitions and so forth. But these, in fact, are highly complementary. So let's think about Cisco. They view their innovation alternatives along a spectrum, starting with build, if you like, which is, so to build it is organic growth. And at the other end of the spectrum is buy. You buy an access to a market. So they're masterful at acquiring and integrating firms. But along this spectrum, if you think about all the things they do, they've got what I would call closed innovation. Everything is done in-house. Open innovation, they've got a lot of partners. They're very good at partnering. But they have internal incubators, which are independent of the rest of the organization. And that's sort of halfway along the spectrum. Then they have external venture groups and venture partners that they invest in. And then finally, mergers and acquisitions. But even an acquisition can be in service of an organic growth strategy, because you may want to use that small toehold acquisition to get insights into a market or to buy a technology you don't have. And by the way, IBM is another company that is masterful at making these kinds of acquisitions in service of organic growth. So I think it's misleading to distinguish sharply and say it's either or. In fact, it's both, and in fact, it's all of them. You just have to figure out how ambitious your growth aspirations are, and then how much you're willing to invest in each of these areas.
Thanks, George. In the book, one of the centerpieces of the book, in fact, are these 14 innovation pathways. In closing, can you just talk a little bit about what those are, what inspired you to develop them, and how they can help organizations drive their innovation.
So this is probably a good way to kind of pull things together. So we have discipline on one side and ability on the other. In the discipline piece, you've got to have an aggressive growth strategy that really signals your aspirations. Second part of that discipline is what I'll call divergence. So you're casting a pretty wide net looking for attractive growth opportunities. You want not just what comes to you, that's sort of a reactive approach, but you're aggressively seeking growth opportunities. And then the last step in this disciplined approach to growth seeking is convergence, where you select the best and you aggressively screen out. Okay, back to full spectrum innovation. Where does one look? And I'm talking about active looking, not just passive waiting for ideas to come to you, but where does one look? So the notion of full spectrum innovation has 14 growth pathways in it. And so I created these growth pathways by essentially decomposing strategy into two parts, the value proposition and the business model. And there's 8 different pathways to expand and elaborate your value proposition, but another 7 or 8 are equally feasible for business model innovation, including different ways to generate and capture value. So modified processes, new monetization methods. And this work, it really does build on the shoulders of many others. So a lot of work we've done in the Mac Center, but work by people like IDEO, Clay Christensen, have all contributed my understanding of what the possible pathways are, and then I've applied them with many of my clients. So my clients are the first ones to tell me, by the way, whether I've got a good idea or not. That's the discipline I live with, and I've been very fortunate to have really, really demanding, interesting, and challenging clients.
Well, thank you, George. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for taking the time to tell us about your new book, Innovation Prowess.
Thank you very much, David.